Emirates once put forward interest in acquiring Etihad Airways, which would have been a prospective move that would aim to redefine the aviation industry while not eventuating. The prospect sparked quite intrigue and also hypotheticals over what this interest could have done for the two companies across the long term had it gone ahead. After all, these are two flagship airlines within the United Arab Emirates and serve as two major global companies as well, with highly recognised branding and route networks that cover every corner of the globe. While the deal never materialized, exploring its premise, possible outcomes, and also the eventual failure does offer an opportunity to understand better and theorize what could have happened. So the premise of the purchase by Emirates, this the airline that was really leading it, looked to take on Etihad Airways. By the mid-2010s, the latter found itself in a financial position that was far from ideal. Its ambitious strategy involved investments in struggling carriers such as Alitalia, Air Berlin, and Jet Airways. Now, these names are ones you may not have heard for quite some time, and that's for good reason, because all those investments backfired and these companies are no longer. Instead of securing partnerships to help strengthen Etihad's global presence, these investments became burdens and significant financial liabilities as again those relative airlines struggled or collapsed. Compounding this was Etihad's pretty large order book for aircraft, which most carriers would love to see. But while in theory, these next generation aircraft would help redefine the business moving forward, ultimately it did have the opposite impact, and this was an airline that believed very quickly it couldn't justify the purchases it had made. It had too many aircraft on order. It felt it had probably misread the situation that it had seen and expanded too quickly. In stark contrast, Emirates had not experienced any of these issues, and in fact across the 2010s was able to solidify its position as a powerhouse, with the hub and spoke model originating from Dubai, its home. Emirates was able to leverage its large aircraft fleet, which included all wide bodies, to serve destinations around the world, and it was aided by financial stability, which made it certainly an attractive option to help at the time the struggling Etihad. Speculation about a potential acquisition or merger emerged to consolidate resources, reduce redundancies, and streamline the operation between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Bloomberg were the ones that heavily led the reporting that Emirates were pursuing this airline as what was considered a last-ditch attempt for Etihad Airways to secure a long-term future. Yes, that is how dire the situation was, but they can consider themselves lucky. While they have put a lot of effort in turning around their fortunes, it should also be mentioned that they do have significant backing, which some airlines that have struggled in the past simply don't have. A merger or acquisition of Etihad by Emirates would have created first and foremost a major airline group, similar to what is currently occurring between the two South Korean carriers of Korean Air and Asiana Airlines. All this would have been highlighted by creating the world's largest airline when we're measuring by available seat kilometers, or ASKs. Getting all of this in working order, however, would have been no easy task and presented the various challenges that I'll go over. Firstly, the airline's Dubai and Abu Dhabi based hubs do present a lot of complications. The cities are pretty close geographically, and consolidating operations would have required some pretty hefty decisions about which hub you're going to prioritize across the long term and how you're really going to allocate resources to ensure there isn't too much overlap. Overlap is a really critical word when examining the merger of these two airlines. Given Emirates' reliance on Dubai's vast network and infrastructure, Abu Dhabi's prominence as a hub, many have argued, would have likely diminished, especially with Emirates being the one taking on Etihad Airways. While of course they would have looked to leverage Abu Dhabi, they're hardly going to scrap their home of Dubai that they've invested so much money in. However, if this approach would have been taken, it would have complicated relations with many people, including your stakeholders, especially considering the importance of Etihad. Secondly, there would have been an overlap in the route networks. Both airlines serve key long-haul markets right around the world. Therefore, merging operations would have necessitated quite a fair bit of route optimization efforts. It's not like Emirates is acquiring a short-haul low-cost unit that it believes it can arm to its advantage. We're looking at two very similar airlines. As a result, the isolation of specific customers and frequent connections would have also occurred. Typically, when mergers take place, airlines will look to either consolidate to compete with the larger airlines, or because they believe that the company they're purchasing has something within their business that can be used. While Emirates could have seen that the struggling Etihad was a project worth taking on, actually making this happen across a Middle Eastern space which is highly competitive would have been challenging. Combining the fleets, though similar in composition, certainly would have had its challenges, but to a certain extent, some would argue that there may have also been opportunities. Both carriers rely heavily on the A380 and even the 777, and many of the aircraft that Etihad Airways have introduced in the past are now going to take a role in Emirates across the next decade. These consolidation considerations translate to all other available assets, such as crew, technology, and more. The ripple effects of such a transaction would have also been felt across the industry. Competitors like Qatar Airways, Turkish Airlines, and European legacy carriers would have also undoubtedly felt the effects, as even smaller, nearby Middle Eastern carriers. In particular, Qatar Airways was a key talking point and remains a major competitor in what many would consider to be the Big Three, this occupying that last all-important slot. Had Emirates and Etihad progressed, this company would have needed to rethink its strategy to protect its market share and find ways to continue growing. Likewise, European airlines, already wary of Gulf carriers' expansion in the last, say, 10 to 15 years, would have likely pushed for tighter regulatory scrutiny to mitigate the impact of the merged powerhouse and allow them to still be competitive and have a route network that wouldn't get overtaken by such a mega airline. Those very regulatory hurdles are something that is definitely worth delving in deeper. These can be some of the biggest roadblocks in seeing consolidation efforts actually materialize, because the formal approval is just so tough. Consolidating these two airlines would have resulted in competitor watchdogs expressing their own concerns in markets where both airlines held a considerable share in. This could range from North America to Asia and even Australia. Watchdogs are essential as they play a fundamental role in understanding whether initiatives being undertaken by businesses will hurt consumers and even down to competitors. They want a healthy landscape, and if they believe two companies are going to come together and have negative ramifications, well, they will either push on new conditions to make the merger more fair or outright reject it. Airline consolidation efforts remain a massive focal point because of the fear that such progression would result in possible downsides across the aforementioned countries. Regulators might have hesitated to approve such a deal for all the likes of higher fares and even reduced competition. Additionally, the political dynamics within the UAE certainly may have looked to complicate the process. Despite all the potential advantages, the Emirates and Etihad merger never ultimately came to fruition. The reasons are pretty extensive, but with hindsight it all makes sense. For one, while Emirates saw potential in Etihad Airways, especially as it was in a period where it was struggling financially, there were obvious risks with taking on the burden at the time. Moreover, there was no guarantee that just because of Emirates' backing, that it would truly be able to turn around the fortunes of the fellow Middle Eastern airline. Additionally, the regulatory hurdles posed obstacles that likely wouldn't have been worthwhile the time and patience required. Finding a means to align the two carriers' network, branding, culture, employee base, and so much more would have really been a challenge. However, also and interestingly, as confirmed by executives at Emirates, Etihad Airways was actually able to recover. This is something that many people believed was not going to be possible, and now, as described by President Tim Clark, it is a robust airline that has become stable on its own, so therefore Emirates doesn't need to come in and help purchase the airline to save it. It firmly also believes that the two can have a very nice working relationship without them taking on the company in full. This could include code-share relations, and this is something that they have actually moved ahead with since the global pandemic. I'd love to hear your take. If the two airlines had come together, what do you think the potential ramifications would have been, and also the obstacles in getting a deal to actually be approved? Thanks a bunch for watching here on GlobeTrotting. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you in a couple of days for your latest industry analysis.